Alright, next up we're going to talk about all the buttons and switches on the camera. Stick with this video if you feel like you already know them. I have a feeling you're going to learn something along the way, at least one little thing that you never knew. So real quick, starting at the this little mark right here is called the focal plane mark, and basically that's where the sensor resides in the camera. And it's basically a quick way for you to look at any type of lens. You're always going to find written on any of the Canon lenses anyway what the minimum focal distance is. So I think for this particular lens it's like 1.5 feet away. So from this plane mark all the way out to 1.5 feet away is where you can focus to the minimum distance. All right, really quick, just color coding in general. And that when we step through the menu system later, you're going to see different colors. And the menu system for blue is more of like a playback, stuff that you can do after you've taken a photo or a video. And in this case, similar. We've got 3 blue buttons right here: zoom, we've got play, and we've got the trash can. Just so you know that they kind of correlate between that and the menu system. All right, neck strap. Now you got 2 places you can anchor your neck strap. Seemed pretty obvious. One thing I just want to add is if you get a battery grip for this camera, you can use this one on this side, and there's going to be an additional one on the battery grip itself, and you can have like a camcorder style where you hold the camera this way, and you've got the strap goes around your hand this way. So it just makes it a little bit easier for shooting. I know some people like shooting in that style. Just thought I'd mention that. All right, next up is your cold shoe or hot shoe. Hot shoe if you're using like a flash, external flash, because this camera doesn't come with a flash. Cold shoe if you're using like a wireless microphone you can mount on top of your camera, or you could like an LED light you can mount on top of there as well. So you just basically take it, slip it in there, and you don't have to worry about there's no power going into because it's just plastic up into this wireless receiver. And you just basically connect your wireless up to your camera, and away you go. Next up is your dioptric adjustment, which is right here. This is more of a stills related item, but since we are going to be taking pictures with this camera for benefit of video, I just thought I'd point that out. And basically what you do is you take your camera, turn it on, look through the viewfinder with it on not live view mode, but you look through the viewfinder, and you're going to see a whole bunch of text on the bottom that's green. And you just basically take your thumb and you rotate it. For me, my left eye is the one I use. My right eye had surgery on it like many years ago, so I can see distance. So I use it for my left eye only. And I just rotate it until you see the text clearly, not what's in the viewfinder itself, just the text. And then that'll get you where you need to be. Another thing is this particular eyepiece on all the Canon cameras. Let's see if I can do this. Yep, I got it. You squeeze it and it comes off. So if you're somebody that wears glasses, putting it up to your eye might not be beneficial with this type of eye cup piece. And then just to put it back on, you just slide it down like that. All right, next up is our mode dial. To turn it, obviously just press the button down in the center. That's a lock button, and then you rotate it. For us, we're only going to be talking about 3 modes, actually really 1, and that's the M mode. You can shoot on AV and TV and shoot videos. For instance, if you wanted to lock your shutter for 50th of a second, you could use TV, lock it to 50th of a second, and then what you could do is if you've had some sort of complicated glide cam shot, which I don't really recommend using TV mode, hardly at all, but let's say if you're going from indoors to outdoors and you wanted the exposure to change automatically because you can't touch the camera while you're using a glide cam type of device, steady cam, whatever type device. So as you're going from outside to inside and you want the exposure to change, it could do it for you without touching the camera. That's about the only instance I'd really recommend not using manual, because the rest of this course we're going to be talking pretty much about how to get the best image quality, setting everything manually yourself. All right, next up is our power button. You'd think it would be pretty obvious. There's a couple things I want to talk about. On the Canon 6D, we've got this GPS system. So if I turn the camera off, you'll notice that it's blinking right now. Actually, I'm inside, so it's trying to acquire and it can't do it. So that's why it's flashing. In the way it's set up by default, it's going to be looking every 15 seconds for GPS coordinates so it can map your location as you go along. This can drain your battery. So even though I've turned the power off and the GPS is turned on, you might want to go through the menu system, we'll talk about later, and turn that off. The other thing I want to talk to you about in terms of power, it's not all the way off. Like obviously you can see that the GPS is flashing, but one of the other things, I'm pretty good at getting these cameras to crash over the years. One of the things that you want to do if it does crash is to turn it off, take the battery all the way out, wait about 10 seconds, put it back in, and that will reboot it. So having that battery connected, there's still power going through the camera even when it's off. All right, next up we're going to talk about all these buttons located on top here. First one on the far right is the lamp button. You press that. I usually use this, pretty much the only time I use it is when I'm shooting like time lapses at night and I can't see the screen very well. And it'll illuminate for a few seconds and turn off. The next one over is your metering mode. And as you can see from the screen here, this function is not available in movie shooting mode. And the reason is because we only have access to one metering mode when we're doing videos, and that's center weighted average. We can't use spot nor evaluative metering. It's always center weighted average. So that's all we get. In a way, it makes it a little bit easier because you get used to that metering mode. And we're going to talk more about metering later. Our next one up is drive mode. And since we can shoot pictures while in video mode, they give us a selection. So let's say if I hit record and then I hit the drive button, I'm taking pictures while the video is shooting. It's not very good for the card. And I don't know if you can see this, but the axis lamp, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, is just all red and it's saying busy. So let's see what it says. Yeah, it took it, surprisingly. We're going to get more about cards here in a little bit. Oh, here we go. It says movie recording has been stopped automatically. And that's basically because this particular card, I put it on purpose, is one of my oldest cards and it can't handle the all-i compression, the video, the video that's going to the card and the stills that are going to the card all at the same time. So you can see it just kind of didn't like it. All right, next up is our, on the far is our autofocus. And so we can choose between 3 different types, and we're going to talk about focusing later, but I usually leave it on quick focus. All right, next up is the ISO button right in the center, and it actually has a little dimple on it. So when you're feeling for it, I usually just go 1, 2, 3, and I know it's the 3rd one in. That one is probably the most important in terms of for us for video. So I use it a lot. So once you press it, you'll see on the screen here, it'll display a lot of different values, and you can rotate using this dial here and this dial up here. And we're going to get these dials later, but 2 different ways, and actually 3 different ways. There's the left and right arrow buttons that will actually do that as well. All right, next up is our main dial, which is really, in our case, is our shutter speed control, because while you can use the main dial for a lot of different things, this is going to be our shutter control. So as you increase the shutter, like I'm going up to like 400th of a second, the image gets darker, and as I go down, the image gets lighter. We're going to be talking more about exposure and all that stuff later, but just to know that the way we're going to control shutter speed is through the main dial. Obviously, you can use the main dial for a lot of other different things, photography, changing ISO, a bunch of other things. That's one of the things you'll notice on this is sometimes there's 3 or 4 different ways to change something with all these dials and switches. Sometimes if you forget what it is, just start playing around with it, and the one that's probably closest to that finger will probably end up working. All right, next up is our shutter button. You might be thinking, well, shutter button, what do we do with that for video? Well, in our case, I'm going to be using a lot of quick focus to acquire focus in difficult lighting situations. So just by pressing it halfway down, it locks on. If I put my hand in front of it, you'll hear it. The lens can't do it. You'll hear no confirmation beep. It's still trying. But if I press halfway down, there's a little beep in there saying that you acquired focus. So we're going to be using that a lot later. All right, next up we're going to talk about the menu button. Pretty simple. You press it once, get you into the menu. Press it again, get you out of the menu. We're going to have a whole entire chapter on all the different menu items. All right, next up is our info button. The info button, unlike the menu button, cycles through. So right here we have mostly just our minimal exposure value info kind of page, I guess you call it. Next up, lists all the quick menu items, which we'll talk about later. Histogram, we'll talk about later. Electronic level. So if you're trying to level out your shot, you can rotate it until it turns green, and then you can lock it off. And I'm not going to get it, am I? There it goes. If you press it again, everything goes off, and you just got basically a clean image. All right, next up is our movie start and stop button, which is right here in the center. If we basically press it, you'll see a little red light turn on, and that indicates that we're creating a movie. Press it again, it stops, obviously. This one button will send you to photography mode, basically. And if you're in photography mode and you press the start stop button, it'll send you to the live view mode. And then if you press it again, it'll send you back. So if you're getting confused while this is start stop button is not working for you movie wise, that's because you need to rotate it to the movie, the red movie icon right here. And then when you press start and stop, it actually starts and stops the movie recording. All right, next up is our quick menu button, and we're going to be spending a whole video on this one. Is the Q right here, and this is a lot easier to use than, let's say, going to the main menu, trying to find what you need to get, because there's so many things in the main menu. You can just basically go out of main menu, go to quick menu, and these are most of the items that you're going to use anyway in video mode, so you can change them rather quickly. Again, we're going to spend a whole entire video on this. All right, next up we're going to talk about this area right here. There's a lot of different things. There's 3 different things on here. The outside is the quick control. In our case, in video mode, since we're in video mode, that's going to be our aperture control. You can bring her up and down the aperture, which is really nice compared to the Rebel line of cameras. We have to press one thing and do something with the main dial. Yeah, this is much easier to handle. And then the interior, the middle area, is our multi-selector. And you basically can cursor left and right, and you can even go, yeah, it's just basically left and right. You know, it's actually deceiving. You would think if I pressed kind of this, not the up or left, it would actually send me to that next focus point, but it's not. So basically up and down functionality on the focus points. And then in our center one is our set button. In this case, it's bringing us to another menu. But if we go to like the quick menu, we can use either one of them. We can use the multi-selector, we can travel around this way, or we can use the outside jog wheel and navigate that way. Again, there's going to be a lot of different ways you can get around. Even if I use the main dial, you can see I can get around with that as well. All right, next up is our zoom button. And in photography, this is great because if you hit the zoom button and then you rotate the main dial, you can actually zoom into or out of the picture, which is great. Now, if we try to do that on videos, so if let's get out of this, record a video, hit stop, hit play, and then I try to use the zoom button, it won't let me. It says cannot magnify. But on the flip side, if I go to the other side, I can see a grid of all the different shots that I've taken, videos or pictures. So unfortunately, I'd love to be able to zoom in on videos, but we can't. But we can still use it as a tool. And let me show you one other thing, is when we're in this mode and I hit the zoom button, this white box will appear. Now let's see if I can get actually something to zoom on. If I hit the zoom button, you'll see a white box appears, and I use the multi-controller to go up. I can now hit the zoom button once, and even twice. It zooms 5 times and 10 times, and then you can take your manual control and you can, unfortunately, it's way too close for the lens, so I can't actually do this. We're going to demonstrate this later, but basically the zoom will amplify 5 or 10, and if you hit it again, it sends you back out. So we can zoom for getting really good accurate focus, but we can't zoom when we're in playback mode. All right, next up we're going to talk about these 3 buttons right here. The AF on is, in our case, we can assign it a lot of different things. There's many different things. We're going to talk about the menu later, but most of the stuff that you can assign it to is more of photography related, so we really can't use it in video mode. One of the things you can do, like I'm focusing outside, it's actually snowing right now. If I focus with our putting the shutter halfway down, we can acquire focus. Now if we use this button right here, we can actually get focus the same exact way. So if you're, for some reason, you'd rather have your thumb here doing focus versus there, when you're in quick focus mode, for getting videos, which we're going to explain later, you can use that button. Again, I can assign it a lot of different things, but it's more on the photography side. So it's almost a useless kind of button for us. The next one over is the star button. Now, if you're in AV mode or TV mode, you can actually lock the exposure with this, and it's basically an exposure lock. So if I'm in, let's see, I'm in AV mode right now. If I rotate, you actually see the exposure change on the screen to where my tripod is, versus it's very bright outside where the snow, and you can see it actually changed. So let's say I go here and I want to lock the exposure, for instance. If I press the star button, and you'll see a little star appear on the screen right here. Now when I rotate it back, you'll see it didn't change. Again, this is not something we're going to do much, is shoot video in this particular mode, AV or TV, and if you're going to lock the exposure, you might as well flip it over to manual exposure mode anyway, and then get your correct exposure using your aperture here and your shutter speed here. So I just wanted to explain what that button does. So it's basically an auto exposure lock. The next button over is basically our grid of focus points, where you can go ahead and select. We can do that on the fly anyway. So in our case, this button is somewhat useless in video mode. All right, next up is our play button. So if we record a movie, let's go ahead and record just a few seconds of this particular movie. Press stop. If I hit play once, I enter into the play area where you can jog between videos that you've already shot. In our case, sorry for the very boring background. If I had a beautiful model here, that would be great. But I don't have a beautiful model to stand out in the snow for me. So basically, if I hit the play button, I can toggle in and out of that mode. Now, you can't play yet until you hit the center set button, and then it brings up this menu. And so this menu's got many different items. You can play it. So if I press once, you'll see that it's playing the video. I can hit set again to stop. If I rotate the outside jog wheel, you can do slow motion. And if you shoot it at 60 frames per second, which we'll get into later, you'll get some very nice smooth motion playback on the screen. But if I do it here, it's not. Well, there's not much movement except for the snow. The next one is you can shuttle back to the first frame. You can go to the previous frame, next frame, and last frame. And then here there's a snapshot feature we're not really going to get into, because if you bought this course, you're most likely going to want to edit, not in the camera, but you're going to want to edit on the computer. So we're not going to talk about that. But you can cut and edit. I suggest anytime that you create a video, you should really not touch that file until you get it onto the computer and you've backed it up a couple times. But you can edit within the camera. And so if you have a very long interview and you only want the first minute and your card is almost full, you can actually go in and cut it, which I really don't recommend doing it. Maybe we'll demonstrate this later, but it's just an item I would say not to do. Just buy a bigger card. Buy 32 gig, 64 gig, and you really won't run into this issue of having to cut up your pieces to save room on your disk. So to get back to out of this mode, out of movie mode, it actually will tell you right up here, if you hit the menu button, it gets you back, and then you can jog to the next video file and play it, review it, whatever you need to do. All right, next up is our delete button. Pretty obvious. Let's hit play, find an image or a video that we want to delete, hit the delete button and hit erase. Now you can go into the main menu system if you want to delete everything on the card or certain ones in a certain folder. You can do it that way. You can do it by date. We'll get into that later when we get into the menu. All right, next up is our axis lamp, and basically it's a light right here and it turns red when the card is being written to. So let's go ahead and demonstrate. If I press record, you're going to see it start to flash, and just kind of intermittently flashing. It's flashing at a pretty regular rate. And then if I take a whole bunch of pictures while I'm shooting video, you can see it turns red and the screen is actually saying busy. It's like, you've sent me way too much. And it might actually stop recording here if it can't handle it. But basically, a couple things to know about this is when it's illuminated red like this, you don't want to power the camera down, and you don't want to open up the SD card door, because if you do, chances are good, and I've had this happen to me, is the card becomes corrupted, and it's very hard to extract all your good files off of the card. So you don't want it to get in that. So also another thing is don't remove the battery while that light is being illuminated. Pretty obvious stuff. All right, next up is the battery compartment door. Again, pretty obvious, but there's one little thing I bet you guys don't know about, unless you've read the manual like I have. Obviously, you pull the battery out. Kind of talked about that before, but there's one additional item that you might not know about, and that's this little access door right here. Let's see if I can pull it back for you. And that little access door allows you to use like a DC, I don't own one, I can't demonstrate or anything, but allows a cable to come out of there so you can have your camera powered on all the time. All right, next up on the bottom of the camera, we have our threads here, and that accepts a quarter 20. So I guess that's like 20 threads per inch or something like that. But it's basically, if you look at the, I've got a little measuring device here, but if you look at the actual diameter, of the, it's exactly a quarter of an inch. Now I bring this up because if you're a beginner and you've never experienced the cameras before and all these, you're going to find basically you're going to get two different sizes, and this might kind of screw you up. Like you might buy a tripod and you try to mount your camera on top of it. Well, if you don't have a fluid head or a ball type head, it's not going to fit, because that is a 3/8 and this is a quarter. So just remember the smaller one is the one that will go into your camera. The larger one is for like fluid heads and other devices like that. So I remember when I first started, I was like, well, what do I order? What's this quarter 20 and what's this 3/8? I was really confused. So hopefully that helps you if you're a beginner. All right, next up is the two compartment doors on the side of the camera. Starting on this side, the top one, this is your remote. So if you're wanting to get into time lapse, which you can create into movies, which I do a lot, you can create some awesome time lapses. They're just a lot of fun. But you don't have to buy the one from Canon. This one is a Velo, much cheaper. It's around 20 bucks, and it works just fine. Battery lasts like for years and everything. So basically, you would just take this and you connect it to here. Now, what I want to pay attention to is this is the 3-pin connector versus the Rebel line has more of like a mini jack. So you don't want to crush the pins that are in there. So you want to put it in the correct direction. And the way I always remember it is it's always facing, it's not up like this, and it's not down. It's always to the front, because if you were to put it this way, it would be blocking these other cables. So you put it in this way. It's only keyed for one way, but I'm really paranoid since there's these little delicate pins. You just don't want to, basically bend them. So yeah, awesome. Doing time lapse is just a lot of fun. Perhaps if I get a chance, I'll do a whole course on how to do time lapses. The next one down is where you put your microphone in. Again, I use two different types. Right now I'm using a Rode VideoMic Pro, which is awesome because it has 20 dB more gain than the other version. And what that allows you to do is get some really clean audio. So what I do, like what I'm doing right now, I'm filming this on my 5D Mark III, and I'm just bringing it in and I'm turning the preamp in the camera all the way down, just one click up basically. And what it does is eliminates that very noisy preamp that the cameras come with, and most of the work is being done with this Rode VideoMic Pro. Highly suggest using that particular microphone. It works great. As you can sound, it works pretty good. The other way that I do is I have these Sennheiser, like a lav system. This is the receiver side of it. And basically you just, like we demonstrated before, you put in the hot shoe and then you just connect this right up to here and away you go. And what's awesome about this unit is very similar to the Rode VideoMic, is you don't need an external like Beach Tech or Juice Link type device that gives you really clean audio, because these things are so hot to begin with they're so sensitive that you really don't need to. So you can actually adjust the level gain and increase it to almost its max gain and turn the preamp in the camera all the way down, and it works wonderful. And just the same with the 6D versus the 5D Mark III. They pretty much have the same preamp in there. So to get the best results, turn it almost all the way down, one click up, and use very hot devices, very sensitive devices like these too. And you don't have to have an external Juice Link Beach Tech type device to basically slow you down, more connections, more batteries to deal with. All right, so next up on the side is we have our AV digital out. Two connectors like we talked about before is you can connect old TVs up with that connector they supplied you with, and then the other one is like a digital interface cable, which I don't have in front of me because I'm actually using it. Basically, you just connect that in and you can connect your computer up. Right now, I'm actually running the EOS software right here on my computer, and I'm going to be demonstrating this all later. So the next one is the HDMI. The box didn't include one of these, and they should. So you need a mini to whatever device you're going to, the normal connector. So basically now, the thing is with these cameras, you got to be really careful with, is you can plug them in, they're keyed, they can only go one way. Now what happens is you got a lot of these devices that you can connect, like external monitors, recorders, stuff like that, which are awesome, but you got to be very protective of that connector. There are accessories you can buy that'll lock it into place, because a lot of times when I've been on like a set or doing a corporate video or something like that, thing gets knocked around. You don't want to bend what's inside there and break it, because that becomes a very expensive fix to fix your HDMI connector. So I've heard horror stories about that. So when you're connecting it up, be very careful and try to do some sort of strain relief so it kind of locks in place. All right, next up is our depth of field preview button right here. It's really out of the way and it's hard to get to. The good thing about it is when it comes to video, it doesn't do a thing. It's only related to when you're looking through the viewfinder or you're in live view mode, not movie mode, but live view mode. You can actually use that on the stills side of thing, but it doesn't do anything for video, so we're really not going to talk about it. All right, next up is our lens mount release. We kind of demonstrated this already, but basically you just press it down and then you can rotate the lens up and off, and then you line up the red dots and you bring it back until it clicks. All right, next up we're going to talk about these two little things right here, these two little black circles. The first one is our remote control sensor. So you can use an RC6. Yeah, that's what it's called, RC6. And it works about 16 feet away, so you can start and stop movies, which is great. I don't own one, but I hear other people really like using it. Another thing you can do instead of doing that is you can use the iPhone app or Android app. It's called EOS Remote. And since we have Wi-Fi built into this, you can take pictures with it, which is awesome. You can download the pictures. You can do all sorts of great stuff onto here. But as of this particular firmware up, or whatever version this is, I don't even know if I can find it. Let me see. It's 1.0.0.1. As I'm recording this, you cannot do anything with video. The GoPro remote works great, and you can start and stop the video up to like 100 feet away or so. And I've tried it. It works quite a few feet away from the camera. But unfortunately for video, we don't have that yet. I'm kind of hoping that they'll update that. If GoPro can do it, I'm sure Canon can do it. The next one over here is your self-timer. Basically, it's for pictures, so as it's counting down, it's going to flash and flash multiple times just before it takes a picture. So that basically doesn't do anything for us. All right, for the mic and speaker locations, right here under with the 6D, there's three little holes, and that's your microphone. So you want to be careful when you're using it. I don't usually like to use the microphone built in it. Sometimes I will if I'm just trying to get some natural sounds. It works okay. It's not the greatest microphone in the world. So just keep your fingers away from it while you're filming, and you should do okay. And you try not to use real noisy lenses as well. Ones that are like, and also if you're using image stabilization, you're going to get kind of that noise as well. So it's not the best solution, but in a pinch, it'll work. And then over here on this side, you have a lot more holes, and that is basically your speaker. Obviously, I don't want to get a whole bunch of rain in here, but I'm sure they're somewhat protected. But those are the two locations for the mic and speaker. All right, next up is our lock button. So basically you can lock 3 different things. By default, there's only one that's locked the way your camera was shipped. So if I put this in, if I don't lock it yet, you can see I can control the aperture. But if I lock it, it'll say the word lock comes up on the screen and I can't. The other thing is the multi-control right here in the center and the main dial. And as you can see, I can use it, but what's happening is by default, it's not done that way. I don't use that. I'm pretty safe and I don't bump things. So if you're one of those people who think you're going to bump it a lot, go ahead and lock down one particular item that you want to lock down, like the main dial, for instance. All right, next up I want to talk about SD cards and compression. You've got 2 different codecs on the 6D. One is All-i and the other one's IPB. IPB creates a smaller file size but compresses the file much more and is harder to edit with. The All-i, easier to edit with, not as much compression. I think it's about 4:1 ratio from what I've seen. Depends on what you're filming. For instance, the IPB will be 4 times smaller than the All-i. And we're going to go through the menu and I'm going to show you how to select these later. But basically, with the SD cards, if you're shooting All-i, you want to get a very fast card. This one in particular is a 95 megabytes per second. You can get one, I've got one that has 45 megabytes per second. That one works just fine in the 6D or the 5D Mark III. This is an older card that I bought. It's a 4 gig card. It's not even rated, whether it's a class 6 or not. I think it is a class 6, but this won't be able to handle the All-i compression. It basically chokes. I think we've already demonstrated that. You'll get a message after about 30 seconds of recording. It'll stop. It says this movie is stopped automatically. And basically it's saying, you know, the buffer is sending as much information as it can to the card, but the card can't handle it, the amount of information the buffer is sending its way. So there's a couple of other reasons to get a really fast card like this one, and it's time. When you start filling these suckers up and you put a lot of information on it, it's going to take a lot of time to get it off the card onto your computer. Well, if you're using USB 3 nowadays, the transfer rates are really fast. So with this one, I can transfer twice as fast as I can with a 45 megabytes per card. So instead of it taking 15 minutes to offload all your information, it will only take like 7 minutes. And then if you have even slower card, it's going to maybe take 20 minutes. So definitely SD cards. I've got these listed on my gear page, which ones I recommend, which ones I've used over the years that work quite well. Definitely invest in good cards because you spent all this money on, expensive glass. You've spent all this money on expensive camera, and this is kind of like your film. And, you want to buy good film, basically good storage media. You don't want to buy the cheapest one you can buy, although these these have come down in price quite a bit. The very first one I bought, 32 gig card, cost like $130. I think I bought this one on sale for like $45. And the 45 gigabyte per second one I think I bought for like $20. You can find a lot of sales. So basically what I do to protect my SD cards is I have a Pelican case. And basically what I do is after I fill them up, I just take them and I turn them upside down and put them into the case this way. So I know if they're upside down, they've already been used. So that's pretty much it for SD cards. All right, next up I want to talk about something that you've probably run into and you've been a little bit frustrated by. So if we turn the camera on and we go to picture still mode and we hold it up to our eye and we take a picture, life is good. It's like I could see through the viewfinder. It's a wonderful experience. Sometimes I like looking through that better than looking on the back of the display, especially in sunny, bright situations where maybe the sun is hitting the screen and you can't hardly ever see it. So next thing I want to show you, to turn the camera off, I'm going to take the lens off, and then what I'm going to do is turn the camera back on, and I'm going to go into live view, and you're going to notice that there's a mirror, and then the mirror, so what's happening in photography is the light is hitting the mirror, getting reflected up into this pentaprism or pentamirror, and the light comes out through the viewfinder. Everything's good. So if I hit this, live view mode, brings up the mirror, and basically what we're looking at is the sensor, or the high pass filter, I believe. So basically in photography mode, light goes up, and then in video mode, it locks up, and we can't see anything through the pentamirror anymore. Another thing to show you really quick while I've got this here is when I'm doing photography, And taking pictures, it's going up and down, up and down. So that's great for photography and capturing like sports and stuff like that. But when you're in video mode, we don't have, like if we go back to video mode, we don't have a mechanical shutter going up and down. We have an electronic shutter. And we're going to be talking about shutter speeds and all about that stuff later. But I just basically wanted to demonstrate that to you, is that the shutter is not being used in movie mode at all. It's just being locked up, lights coming in. And unfortunately, we can't use this. So what do? Let's put the lens back on. So what we do is we use a device like this. It's a carry speed. A lot cheaper than the Zacuto, which is like $300 or $400. This is like 120 bucks. So this is on my gear page. And basically you just put it into here. Make sure you got a nice seal and there's no leaks coming in around here. And turn the camera on and put the movie mode. And hold it up to your eye. And then you can film. And what's really nice about this is it gives you a point of contact. Instead of being on like a neck strap and holding it out and looking at the screen, you can only hold it so steady. But when you have a point of contact, it's much easier. And also you can buy rigs, shoulder rigs, a whole bunch of matte boxes, stuff we're not going to get into. But this is a pretty essential item when it's really sunny outside and you can't see the screen, especially if the sun's coming from this direction, hitting the screen, and you're like, I think I see something. And we're going to get more into focus later, but this is a great tool for exposure, focus, and just keeping your camera steady. All right, next up we're going to talk about image stabilization real quick. Just give you a quick example of what it can do for you. I'm next to a road. What I'm going to do is turn the image stabilization off. And I'm going to try tracking some cars. I'm going to be using this viewfinder as kind of a point of contact. And here's one coming up the road, so we'll start with this guy. I'll use quick focus and start recording now. And what I'm trying to do is keep this, looks like a Jeep, right in the center of the frame. Okay, now I'm going to turn the image stabilization on and start tracking this guy right here. And I can notice right now it's just silky smooth. It's so easy to track this guy right in the center of the frame. I'm using the white rectangle box. So what I think you noticed there is having image stabilization off is really jerky, and having it on can give you really silky smooth shots when you're hand holding. Now, one of the things, depends on the lens. You have to look at the owner's manual, but most of the ones that have image stabilization not require, but recommend that you turn it off when you're on a tripod. Because if you leave it on, it can actually add motion into the shot. A good way of testing this is actually putting it in your nonlinear editor and then just scrubbing quickly along the timeline while it's locked down on the tripod, and you'll actually see some movement. It's pretty subtle, but most of them tell you to turn it off. All right, next up what I'm gonna do is use the 70 to 200. Really, when it comes down to it, if you're gonna zoom all the way to 200, you should really have the IS turned on. So what I'm gonna do as an example here is IS handheld with this versus the tripod, just to give you an idea of which is which. So we're going to turn the image stabilization on. I usually like stabilizer mode number 2 on this particular lens. Hold it up. I'm going to do is track from this far left windmill. Let's go ahead and hit record. And let's see, once I get nice and steady, I'm going to track from that windmill. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. And as you can see, I didn't do that great of a job because we're all the way at 200. So just as a comparison, quick comparison, let's go ahead and line this up where I was before. And I'm gonna hit record and then just do it nice and gently with the tripod. And this is what it should look like.
Okay, that was with image stabilization on. I'm gonna turn it off since I am on a tripod, but I'm actually moving the tripod, so let's do it one more time. And this is with image stabilization off. All right, next up I want to talk about rolling shutter. Every Canon DSLR has this issue, just so you're going to be aware of it. Best way I can describe it to you is there is a utility pole out there, and basically what I'm going to do is get it to get the vertical shape to do this kind of swaying motion. And when you're shooting at 200, like I am on this lens, let's go ahead and just demonstrate it for you so you can know what it looks like. Go ahead and focus on the pole and turn it on, and I'll just start swaying back and forth and working my way down and up the pole. And you know, obviously you're not going to violently shake the camera as much as I'm doing here, but you can see the pole kind of swaying back and forth. And that's what the image stabilization turned on. Let's go ahead and turn it off and see what that looks like. Maybe a little bit worse. It's hard to tell from just looking through the viewfinder here, but I'm going to say it's about the same. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. When you're shooting like at 24 rather than 200, you're not going to get this effect, especially as you know, as you're shaking it just that little bit amount. In fact, let's go ahead and try it on the 24. All right, now we got the 24 to 105. Turn the image stabilization on, and we're going to go all the way to 24. And let's go ahead and record. And I'm going to move it just as much as I did last time. And you might, you know, the pole at this distance is not doing anything. If I get rid of all the foreground objects, at least I don't see it bending as much as it did before. But if you look at the foreground objects, might be able to see a little bit of that. So just, that's something to definitely keep in mind when you're filming. Try not to violently shake it back and forth. Actually, I'm not doing it that much, but when you're hand holding it, try not to add too much of that jello effect into it. All right, next up I want to talk about aliasing. Aliasing, the best way I can describe it to you is just basically show it to you. And where it's going to kind of rear its ugly head is when you're shooting kind of horizontal objects and you're shooting at like 720p. So what I'm going to do is I want to shoot this guardrail like I've done before, but guardrail is horizontal, but it's a little off, and you're going to see some, well, let's go ahead and hit record. And got to make sure you're pretty much right focused on it. And then I'm just going to move this camera slowly around and look at the edges of the road too, as well as the lines on the road, and look at the guardrail itself. You're going to see some kind of jaggedy lines that are kind of dancing around a little bit. And this particular camera, the Canon 60, doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter built into it. The 5D Mark III does. So it's just one of those things you're going to have to watch out for. Let's say you're in an interview situation, you've got the person in the foreground and you've got that person tack sharp, and let's say there is a guardrail or something in the background that has a very horizontal look to it, has very discrete lines. As long as you throw that stuff out of focus, wildly out of focus in the background, you shouldn't have to worry about it. So it's something to definitely keep in mind to watch out for aliasing, because it's really hard to see sometimes on the display. Then you bring it back into your nonlinear editor and you're like, oh, their shot's ruined.
All right, next up I want to talk about moire patterns. It's something else you really have to pay attention to with the Canon 6D because it doesn't have an anti-aliasing filter built into it. Best way to describe it to you is to show you what it looks like. Here's a roof. Yeah, the roofs don't look like that. They don't have these patterns developing on the roof line that have that kind of dancing texture to it. So here it is that's at 720, but here it is at 1080, and you can see it's a lot better. And I almost don't even really see any patterns developing, slightly, ever so slightly, but basically if you're shooting at 720 for slow motion, or you're doing some other work at 720, you just gotta be really careful what's in the background. For instance, if this was a bikelet race and there were a whole bunch of bikers going past that guardrail, you didn't think of the roof in the background, your shot's pretty much ruined, because the viewer's eye might not go to the bicyclist. They're going to go to the roof and say, what's going on with that roof? It's kind of dancing around and making all this, weird looking patterns. It happens in a lot of different situations. You really have to pay attention. If you're going to do an interview, one of the other things that's really a good tip is to shoot with a really shallow depth of field, because anything in the background, if there are horizontal lines, will get all blurred out and you're not going to see these patterns occur. And again, it happens a lot of times with horizontal lines, especially lines that are not quite perfectly horizontal. They might be a little off kilter. You're going to see this kind of aliasing, and then moire patterns, when it gets really bad, is when you see the patterns occur. So aliasing, moire, not the greatest things with these cameras, but you can overcome it. If you really have to pay attention to what's in the background, or even in the foreground, what's possibly on somebody's shirt. So there's moire patterns.